While those are coming around, let me just remind you again, like we're not doing these kind of classes as an alternative to the study of Scripture, but just as a way, something that we started last year, I suppose, with the Pilgrim's Progress, earlier this year with the Great Divorce, trying to expose you to some Christian literature that helps us to think Christianly. And G.K. Chesterton is been one of the most profound aids in my life, at least, in that regard. His work is always helping us think Christianly about the world that we live in. Last week I shared several quotes with you from different things that he had written around the idea of the family. Again, we'll probably revisit this theme several times before the end of the year. But let me share again one of the quotes that I gave you from Heretics last week. He said, "The supreme adventure is not falling in love, the supreme adventure is being born. There we do walk suddenly into a splendid and startling trap. There we do see something of which we have not dreamed before. Our father and mother do lie in wait for us and leap out on us like brigands from a bush. Our uncle is a surprise. Our aunt is, in the beautiful common expression, a bolt from the blue. When we step into the family by the act of being born, we do step into a world which is incalculable, into a world which has its own strange laws, into a world which could do without us, into a world that we have not made." In other words, when we step into the family, we step into a fairy tale, end quote. And so Chesterton has this perspective. He sees magic. He has a sense of wonder in every part of life. And he approaches everything through that lens of a Christian imagination. So he wasn't a theologian, he was not a pastor, but he was a man who could see reality through the lens of Christian faith. And that is a skill that we want to cultivate. I want to encourage you as you're watching movies with your kids, as you're reading books aloud as a family, as you sit in your house, walk by the way, lie down, rise up. You're constantly thinking about God and about His Word and about His work in this world so that you're just constantly drawn to seeing and experiencing and engaging reality through the lens of your faith. So Chesterton's work, I think, is helpful to us in that regard. Now, last week we began looking at the drift from domesticity, and today we're going to be picking up on your copy on page 2, and we're going to come down to the third paragraph. The third paragraph on page 2. The paragraph that says, "It is now necessary to recite these truisms." That's where we're going to begin in just a minute. But let me remind you of a couple of things we saw in the first part of the essay last week. He begins with the idea of Reformation. And he's not talking about the Protestant Reformation, but just the idea of reform in general. He says that no one who does not understand the purpose of a thing is qualified to try to reform that thing. If you're passing through the wood and you see a fence in the middle of the woods, it seems to serve no purpose. Tear it down. Chesterton says you should not do that until you understand how it came to be there and why it once was there. And only once you understand something can you then intelligently begin to change it. Now that is a true principle, not just for faith, not just for family, but really for all of life. You have no business reinventing things that you don't understand. Your ignorance is an evidence of your disqualification. It's only when someone says, "I do understand what this is, why it's here, how it came to be here, and now I am able intelligently to say that purpose may not be well served, or may no longer be well served by whatever it is." We have people who have been seeking to socially engineer the family for a very long time. Feminism has been a deliberate, explicit attempt to restructure the family. In 2015, we had kind of the culmination, or at least a point of culmination, in the progress of feminism when the Supreme Court somehow discovered a right to same-sex marriage. But that's an oxymoron. There's no such thing as same-sex marriage. and the transgender madness that we're living in the middle of right now, that fortunately some parts of American culture seem to finally be pushing back on and saying this is a really bad idea, we're participating in insanity, right? That itself is the fruit of feminism, which says that men and women are interchangeable. And if men and women are interchangeable, well then the idea of sex itself is completely malleable or only a nominal construct. So what Chesterton is doing, now he's living 100 years ago. He's writing this essay. It's published in The Thing, is the name of the collection, in 1929. This is 100 years ago that Chesterton is talking about the drift away from domesticity, away from the family as God has ordered it. And he's calling us back, really, to a common sense recognition of the way that things are, and understanding that the way that things are has a purpose, and that if you don't understand that purpose, you're certainly not qualified to begin tearing down fences. Let's pick up in the next part of the essay. He says, "It is now necessary to recite these truisms, for only by doing so can we begin to get a glimpse of that reason for the existence of the family which I began this essay by demanding. They were all familiar to our fathers, who believed in the links of kinship and also in the links of logic. Today, our logic consists mostly of missing links, and our family largely of absent members. But anyhow, this is the right end at which to begin any such inquiry, and not at the tail end or the fag end of some private muddle by which Dick has become discontented, or Susan has gone off on her own. If Dick or Susan wish to destroy the family because they do not see the use of it, I say, as I said in the beginning, if they do not see the use of it, they had much better preserve it. They have no business even to think of destroying it until they have seen the use of it." A fag end, that's a British expression for a cigarette butt, right? And that's not where you begin this business. You have to begin at the beginning. You have to understand what the family is, why it has stood in the way that it has for millennia. Understand, he's not making a biblical argument here. Now, as Christians, we would want to make the biblical argument, and we do. I mean, we're preaching through Genesis right now, so we're literally talking about the foundations of the family. But Chesterton's not even trying to make a biblical argument. He's just saying, from a historical and cultural perspective, people are trying to do away with the family or disassemble, rearrange, reinvent the family, and they don't know what they're doing because they don't understand what the family is or why it is the way that it has been for so long. In one of the works that I mentioned last week, Brave New Family, this is not a work that Chesterton published, but it is a collection that came out several decades ago of some of his writings on the family. It's now out of print, but you can still find it online. I highly recommend that book. Brave New Family includes this quote from one of Chesterton's works called Early Notebooks, kind of a collection of some of his thoughts. It says this, quote, "Of all human institutions, marriage is the one which most depends upon slow development, upon patience, upon long reaches of times, upon magnanimous compromise, upon kindly habit." End quote. People abandon marriage at the very point where marriage would call us to perseverance, to humility. Things get difficult. As we saw last week in an earlier part of the essay, Chesterton says there's no such thing as a compatible marriage. You have a man and a woman married. They are by definition incompatible. And that's part of the point. And if you say, but you know, like again, I told you as a pastor, I've had men and women come to me and say I've fallen out of love with my spouse. So you can repent of that. And you must repent of it. Because marriage is not sustained by this emotional, affectional connection where I view my spouse as my soulmate. That's not how earlier generations thought about marriage. If you've read, not old, but just older literature, you might have been appalled at the views of marriage that you saw, where people are getting married for the sake of security, for the sake of companionship. Like a woman is marrying a man so that she'll have someone to take care of her. A man is marrying a woman so that he will have a mother for his children. And you say, that's just awful and thoroughly biblical. The book of Ruth I find fascinating because it is a love story in which no love is ever found. Ruth and Boaz are almost, not quite, but almost the only heroes and heroines in the Bible who are not called beautiful people. Do you realize that? Ruth was married for 10 years. She was a barren woman. She was married for 10 years and never had a child. And it wasn't because she was taking the pill. It wasn't because she was aborting her babies. It's because God's curse was upon the family into which she had married, the family that had abandoned the land of Israel in a time of judgment. They're part of the covenant unfaithfulness. And then she comes back to Israel and she meets the kinsman redeemer, Boaz, who is an old man. A Jewish tradition says he's 80. I don't know if he's that old. But he's an old man. And when Ruth, indicates her willingness to be married to him, he praises her that she did not go after young men. This is an old dude. It's a marriage of convenience because Ruth and her mother-in-law are impoverished and Boaz can save them. Now, I'm not suggesting that, we're all hoping for our children just to fall into a marriage of convenience. I want my children to be able to love deeply the people that they are married to. But you have to recognize that our society teaches us to say that every marriage needs to be like this romantic Disney movie. And the prince just sweeps the girl off her feet. Or a modern Disney movie, the princess saves the lame beta male prince, and they just live happily ever after. But that's just not marriage. If you've been married more than 3 weeks, like you've seen your spouse as someone that is, at that moment, not particularly attractive. I mean, you get married and you see them, what they look like in the morning, and you're like, whoa! And Chesterton is saying that marriage calls for this kind of endurance, this kind of patience, this kind of persistence, that I have a commitment to a kindly habit. In other words, the discipline of covenant. The next paragraph, he says, but it has other uses, besides the obvious fact that it means a necessary social work being done for love, which cannot be done for money, and, one might almost dare to hint, presumably to be repaid with love, since it is never repaid in money. On that simple side of the matter, the general situation is easy to record. The existing and general system of society, subject in our own age and industrial culture to very gross abuses and painful problems, is nevertheless a normal one. It is the idea that the commonwealth is made up of a number of small kingdoms, of which a man and a woman become the king and queen, and in which they exercise a reasonable authority subject to the common sense of the commonwealth until those under their care grow up to found similar kingdoms and exercise similar authority. This is the social structure of mankind, far older than all its records and more universal than any of its religions, and all attempts to alter it are mere talk and tomfoolery. The family is the basic political institution. It is the fundamental kingdom from which all other kingdoms of men are assembled. God in the garden creates a family. He doesn't create a centralized government. He creates the government of the family. The state comes along as a result of the combination of many families. And in the home, there's a king and there's a queen, and there are subjects. And those in Chesterton's day, whose great-grandchildren now in our day, have tried to turn the family into this egalitarian democracy, have destroyed something that they don't understand. They are destroying something that they don't understand. This idea that, every member of the family gets an equal vote. Like the kids need to participate in making decisions for the family and they can overrule mom and dad. They can be emancipated from mom and dad. They can make their own decisions, be their own citizens. But how does that work? As Chesterton said in the last part of the essay that we read last week, how does that work when the parents decide to be emancipated from their infants? You see, the mom and the dad are there as king and queen to rule benevolently for the sake of their subjects. And the goal is to raise young men and women who are going to go and found kingdoms of their own. That's the goal. It's not lifelong servitude. It's not perpetual slavery. It's equipping and preparing kings and queens to go out and rule the world. In a work that I quoted from already last week that Chesterton wrote in 1920, about 10 years before this essay, called The Superstition of Divorce, he says this, quote, "Every sane man recognizes that unlimited liberty is anarchy, or rather, is non-entity. The civic idea of liberty is to give the citizen a province of liberty, a limitation within which a citizen is a king. This, the only way in which truth can ever find refuge from public persecution, and the good man survive the bad government. But the good man by himself is no match for the city. There must be balanced against it another ideal institution, and in that sense an immortal institution. So long as the state is the only ideal institution, the state will call on the citizen to sacrifice himself, and therefore will not have the smallest scruple in sacrificing the citizen. The state consists of coercion, and must always be justified from its own point of view in extending the bounds of coercion, as, for instance, in the case of conscription, drafting for military service. The only thing that can be set up to check or challenge this authority is voluntary law and a voluntary loyalty. That loyalty is the protection of liberty in the only sphere where liberty can fully dwell. It is a principle of the Constitution that the king never dies. It is the whole principle of the family that the citizen never dies. There must be a heraldry and heredity of freedom, a tradition of resistance to tyranny. A man must be not only free, but free-born. Do you understand what he's talking about? The relationship there between the state and the family. Everyone who is trying to deconstruct the family is seeking to put the state in its place. If you do not have strong families, you will have a nanny state that becomes an oppressive totalitarian regime. When you have strong families, you have liberty. But those strong families have to have order, have to have hierarchy. They have to function as kingdoms working together in the kingdom so that the state does not become a dragon. We continue in this essay. He says, but the other advantage of the small group is now not so much neglected as simply not realized. Here again we have some extraordinary delusions spread all over the literature and journalism of our time. Those delusions now exist in such a degree that we may say for all practical purposes that when a thing has been stated about 1,000 times as obviously true, it is almost certain to be obviously false. One such statement may be specially noted here. There is undoubtedly something to be said against domesticity and in favor of the general drift toward life in hotels, clubs, colleges, communal settlements, and the rest, or for a social life organized on the plan of the great commercial systems of our time. But the truly extraordinary suggestion is often made that this escape from the home is an escape into greater freedom. The change is actually offered as favorable to liberty. Now, try to follow his train of thought. If we get away from the home, if we get away from the family, if we get out on our own and we have our own lives and our own social circles and our own activities, we're going to have greater freedom than this oppressive traditional family situation. Chesterton's going to say, not so. It's just the opposite. You want to lose your liberty? Then move toward the monstrosity. If you want to preserve your liberty, have a strong family unit. He goes on. To anybody who can think, of course, it is exactly the opposite. The domestic division of human society is not perfect, being human. It does not achieve complete liberty, a thing somewhat difficult to do or even to define. But it is a mere matter of arithmetic that it puts a larger number of people in supreme control of something and able to shape it to their personal liking than do the vast organizations that rule society outside, whether those systems are legal or commercial or even merely social. Even if we were only considering the parents, it is plain that there are more parents than there are policemen or politicians or heads of big businesses or proprietors of hotels. As I shall suggest in a moment, the argument actually applies indirectly to the children as well as directly to the parents. But the main point is that the world outside the home is now under a rigid discipline and routine, and it is only inside the home that there is really a place for individuality and liberty. Anyone stepping out of the front door is obliged to step into a procession, all going the same way, and to a great extent even obliged to wear the same uniform. Business, especially big business, is now organized like an army. It is, as some would say, a sort of mild militarism without bloodshed, as I should say, a militarism without the military values. But anyhow, it is obvious that 100 clerks in a bank or 100 waitresses in a tea shop are more regimented and under rule than the same individuals when each has gone back to his or her own dwelling or lodging, hung with his or her favorite pictures or fragrant with his or her favorite cheap cigarettes. But this, which is so obvious in the commercial case, is no less true even in the social case. In practice, the pursuit of pleasure is merely the pursuit of fashion. The pursuit of fashion is merely the pursuit of convention, only that it happens to be a new convention. The jazz dances, the joy rides, the big pleasure parties and hotel entertainments do not make any more provision for a really independent taste than did any of the fashions of the past. If a wealthy young lady wants to do what all the other wealthy young ladies are doing, she will find it great fun simply because youth is fun and society is fun. She will enjoy being modern exactly as her Victorian grandmother enjoyed being Victorian. And quite right too. But it is the enjoyment of convention, not the enjoyment of liberty. It is perfectly healthy for all young people of all historic periods to herd together to a reasonable extent and enthusiastically to copy each other. But in that there is nothing particularly fresh and certainly nothing particularly free. The girl who likes shaving her head and powdering her nose and wearing short skirts will find the world organized for her and will march happily with the procession. But a girl who happened to like having her hair grown down to her heels or loading herself with barbaric gauds and trailing garments, or, most awful of all, leaving her nose in its original state, natural state, she will still be well advised to do these things on her own premises. If the Duchess does want to play leapfrog, she must not start suddenly leaping in the manner of a frog across the ballroom of the Babylon Hotel, when it is crowded with the 50 best couples professionally practicing the very latest dance for the instruction of society. The Duchess will find it easier to practice leapfrog to the admiration of her intimate friends in the old oak-paneled hall of Fitzdragon Castle. If the dean must stand on his head, he will do it with more ease and grace in the calm atmosphere of the deanery than by attempting to interrupt the program of some social entertainment already organized for philanthropic purposes. Hopefully you were able to follow his train of thought there. Let me illustrate it for you. Have you ever had a teenager, probably a young woman, say, "I want to be unique, like everyone else"? I always thought that was just like a preacher illustration, and then I actually heard a young lady say that. Not self-consciously at all, like without any recognition of what she just said. I want to be unique, like everyone else. Think about that for a second. You went to public school, didn't you? You can't be unique like everyone else. The place where uniqueness and freedom happens is in small circles. It's in your home. You see, you get to decide how your home is decorated, what the rules are, what kind of music you play, what time is bedtime, what time it is to get up. You get to decide when you have family traditions, family movie night, ice cream together, a game night. You have freedom there. You move into a club. You move into a larger social circle of a bunch of disconnected individuals. Nobody has any freedom. Nobody. Nobody. Because everyone is going to have to get on the same page. That's why the Duchess can't play leapfrog in the ballroom. It's because that's not the way that it's done. But she can play leapfrog at home. You see, the family structure, this oppressive, hierarchical structure, is actually safeguarding liberty. It's giving freedom. It's providing space for joy. And you will not have that anywhere else. The mom who decides, again, like I mentioned last week, the Reba McEntire song, right? Is there life out there? So much she hasn't done. Is there a place beyond her family and her home? Right? I'm just working my fingers to the bone day after day, taking care of these kids, doing the laundry, preparing meals, mopping the floor. I want real freedom by going out into the workplace and doing all of that and working just as hard for people that don't care about me at all. That would lay me off at the drop of a hat. That don't care if I'm sick. They don't care if I need a break. Now I have freedom. Now I have significance. I'm mopping someone else's floor. Rather than being the queen of my domain. And guys, point's the same for us. The point's the same for us. Like we find, as human beings, we find part of the meaning of life in the work that we do. And you're supposed to. That's a biblical Christian idea. You're not to idolize your work as if my work is the sum total of my existence. It's where I find my fulfillment and peace and joy. No, that's in Jesus. But work is part of the meaning of life. And you're supposed to be a king in your castle. You're supposed to care about the work that you do there in your home. That has significance. What you do for your boss, it may or may not. He goes on in the next paragraph. If there is this impersonal routine in commercial and even in social things, it goes without saying that it exists and always must exist in political and legal things. For instance, the punishments of the state must be sweeping generalizations. It is only the punishments of the home that can possibly be adapted to the individual case, because it is only there that the judge can know anything of the individual. If Tommy takes a silver thimble out of a work basket, his mother may act very differently according as she knows that he did it for fun or for spite, or to sell to somebody, or to get somebody into trouble. But if Tompkins takes a silver thimble out of a shop, the law not only can, but must punish him according to the rule made for all shoplifters or stealers of silver. It is only the domestic discipline that can show any sympathy, or especially any humor. I do not say that the family always does do this, but I say that the state never ought to attempt it. So that even if we consider the parents alone as independent princes and the children merely as subjects, the relative freedom of the family can and often does work to the advantage of those subjects. But so long as the children are children, they will always be the subjects of somebody. The question is whether they are to be distributed naturally under their natural princes, as the old phrase went, who normally feel for them what nobody else will feel. A natural affection. It seems to me clear that this normal distribution gives the largest amount of liberty to the largest number of people. Do you understand what he's saying? In family, the king and the queen care about their subjects. Not so in any other institution. You might say, no, my third grade teacher, she cared about all of us. But not like your mama did. Now, he's going to deal with the fact that are there exceptions to this? Of course there are. There are bad parents. There are abusive parents. But it doesn't change the fundamental reality of what the family is and how it's supposed to function. He said in an earlier part of the essay that we read last week that because there are bad families, bad parents, the state sometimes has to step in. But ironically, in stepping in, what is the state doing? It's taking the child, in this case, away from the very structure that was meant to provide and protect and love this child. Now, he's having to take the child away because the family is not doing what they're supposed to do. But the state can't do what the family is supposed to do. He can't. The state cannot provide what good, faithful parents will. And so he uses this example of discipline. The law has to be equally applied in the state. Not saying it always is perfectly, but there can't be a lot of consideration. Here is the penalty for theft. But in the home, it matters very much what actually happened and why, and who did it, and under what circumstances, and for what purpose. And a wise parent is not going to say, well, this is the law, and so it's the law for every child, regardless of the context, regardless of the circumstances. We just let the consequences follow. No, you know your children. You care about your children. And you're going to assign appropriate consequences based upon what you understand about them and their crime. You see, it's protecting the interests of the subjects. And yet Chesterton is working against a sort of feminism that says marriage is oppressive for women and it is oppressive for children. And therefore the wife needs to be liberated from the home and the children need to be sent away. Let a boarding school take care of them. Oh, that gives them so much more freedom, right? No, it puts them under the control of people that can never care about them the way that their parents did. Let the wife be liberated from the authority of her husband, right, so that she can be some other dude's slave who doesn't care anything about her and spend and be spent in some kingdom that it will never be her own. This is progress? Chesterton is just making a common sense point. In The Superstition of Divorce, he also says this, and if you want all of the extra quotes that I'm giving you, I'm happy to share that with you, but your handout would be 10 pages long, which is why I didn't want to staple that much paper, right? But I'm happy to give you any of these other quotations. He says this: modern education is founded on the principle that a parent is more likely to be cruel than anybody else. Modern education is founded on the principle that a parent is more likely to be cruel than anybody else. Follow his train of thought. It passes over the obvious fact that he is less likely to be cruel than anybody else. Anybody may happen to be cruel, but the first chances of cruelty come with the whole colorless and indifferent crowd of total strangers and mechanical mercenaries whom it is now the custom to call in as infallible agents of improvement. Policemen, doctors, detectives, inspectors, instructors, and so on. They are automatically given arbitrary power because there are here and there such things as criminal parents, as if there were no such things as criminal doctors or criminal schoolmasters. A mother is not always judicious about her child's diet, so it is given into the control of Dr. Crippen. Historical note here. Harvey Crippen was a homeopath, very well-known ear and eye specialist who murdered his wife and was hanged for it some years before this, 1910. A father is thought not to teach his sons the purest morality, so they are put under the tutorship of Eugene Aram. Eugene Aram, in the 1700s, was a teacher and philologist who was also notoriously immoral, a repeat thief, and finally was also hanged for murder. But he's the schoolmaster that's going to teach your son better morality than his idiot father. These celebrated criminals are no more rare in their respective professions than the cruel parents are in the profession of parenthood. But indeed, the case is far stronger than this, and there is no need to rely on the case of such criminals at all. The ordinary weaknesses of human nature will explain all the weaknesses of bureaucracy and business government all over the world. The official need only be an ordinary man to be more indifferent to other people's children than to his own, and even to sacrifice other people's family prosperity to his own. He may be bored, he may be bribed, he may be brutal for any one of the 1,000 reasons that ever made a man a brute. All this elementary common sense is entirely left out of account in our educational and social systems of today. It is assumed that the hireling will not flee, and that solely because he is a hireling. It is denied that the shepherd will lay down his life for the sheep, or for that matter, even that the she-wolf will fight for the cubs. We are to believe that mothers are inhuman, but not that officials are human. There are unnatural parents, but there are no natural passions. At least, there are none where the fury of King Lear dared to find them in the beetle. Such is the latest light on the education of the young, and the same principle that is applied to the child is applied to the husband and wife. Just as it assumes that a child will certainly be loved by anybody except his mother, so it assumes that a man can be happy with anybody except the one woman he has himself chosen for his wife. I love Chesterton. And his logic is irresistible. It's just devastating. He's not denying that there are bad parents. But he's saying you are assuming that because there are bad parents, there can be no bad social workers. There can be no bad public school teachers. There can be no bad agents of the state. And he's saying the best of the agents outside of the family who are entrusted with parental responsibility can never, the best of them, can never be what parents naturally are. That's just the reality. In fact, I would take his argument a step further and say, not only can they not be, they must not try to be. If our police officers try to bring the compassion of a parent to the situations that they confront every day, they will not be able to do their job. If a nurse, if a doctor, if a firefighter, a paramedic tries to bring the compassion of a member of the family to an emergency situation, he cannot do his job. If the school teacher tries to bring the compassion and wisdom of a mother to her class of 30 children, she cannot do her job. You cannot replace the people that God has put in those roles. And that is not denying that some of those people are really bad and need to be dealt with and should not ever reproduce. They should not ever have responsibility over children. But it's this naive idea that parents are obviously fools and failures, and the state representatives who are glad to step into the void cannot ever be that. One last paragraph in our essay. He says this: "My complaint of the anti-domestic drift is that it is unintelligent. People do not know what they are doing because they do not know what they are undoing. There are a multitude of modern manifestations, from the largest to the smallest, ranging from a divorce to a picnic party. But each is a separate escape or evasion, and especially an evasion of the point at issue. People ought to decide in a philosophical fashion whether they desire the traditional social order or not, or if there is any particular alternative to be desired. As it is, they treat the public question merely as a mess or medley of private questions. Even in being anti-domestic, they are much too domestic in their test of domesticity. Each family considers only its own case, and the result is merely narrow and negative. I'm not happy, so no one can be. My family is struggling, so everyone must be. Each case is an exception to a rule that does not exist. The family, especially in the modern state, stands in need of considerable correction and reconstruction. Most things do in the modern state. Make sure you're paying attention to Chesterton's qualifiers. If you walk away from here and say, Chesterton doesn't realize the reality of child abuse, Chesterton doesn't realize the reality of bad marriages and unfaithful spouses and just all of the tyranny and oppression that that's not his argument. He's been very explicit. He's not denying that there's a lot that's wrong with families that needs to be repaired. He's just saying what you're doing is not repairing anything. You're just tearing down something you don't understand. But the family mansion should be preserved or destroyed or rebuilt. It should not be allowed to fall to pieces brick by brick because nobody has any historic sense of the object of bricklaying. If you're going to tear it down, tear it down. Don't just let it fall apart. For instance, the architects of the Restoration should rebuild the house with wide and easily opened doors for the practice of the ancient virtue of hospitality. Your house may need that kind of renovation. Your family may not be oriented toward hospitality. The Bible says you should be. So that might be a place where you say, you know something? Our home needs some reconstruction. In other words, private property should be distributed with sufficiently decent equality to allow of a margin for festive intercourse. In other words, you need to prosper so that you can be liberal, generous, giving. But the hospitality of a house will always be different from the hospitality of a hotel. And it will be different in being more individual, more independent, more interesting than the hospitality of a hotel. It is perfectly right that the young Browns and the young Robinsons should meet and mix and dance and make asses of themselves according to the design of their Creator. But there will always be some difference between the Browns entertaining the Robinsons and the Robinsons entertaining the Browns. And it will be a difference to the advantage of variety, of personality, of the potentialities of the mind of man, or, in other words, of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Your hospitality does not need to look like the person who is sitting on the other side of the sanctuary from you. It should look the way that it ought to look in your home. And that might be fine china and expensive liquor and, nicely seasoned steaks, or it might be paper plates and peanut butter sandwiches. And it doesn't matter. That's part of the beauty of what God has created. All of these little kingdoms where kings and queens and their subjects get to build a world of life, liberty, and happiness. Rather than every one of your homes having to look like Best Western. So, that is the drift from domesticity, okay?